Hey folks, it's Tom, your Frugal Prepper. Good old Ivan. He did a video where he had to solder some grounds on a Jeep, I think it was. Yeah, it was a Jeep. It was some kind of Chrysler. The Chryslers always have the bad grounds. But, you know, GMs have enough bad grounds and problems too from time to time. So, I'm mostly a GM guy. But I do a fair amount of repairs. So, and I've done a lot of soldering. You know, I started soldering back in high school. I was replacing keyboard connectors on motherboards for computers. I got into doing more board level type repair on laptops, like mostly DC power jack replacements. But I would also, take a board that cracked and scratch it up and solder in a bodge wire. I would, common failures on motherboards. That they have a common failure of a MOSFET or a voltage regulator or something. I would repair those boards. So I did a lot of really fine soldering. I've done a lot of really heavy soldering too, battery cables and lugs and all kinds of stuff like that. And I have like a Weller. I have this little bench soldering iron over here that, and all of those kind of suck because you have to plug them in. And I know you can bring an inverter with you and run an extension cord, but they also suck because they're big. I mean, this is a big iron, and, this one will put out, I think, 30 or 60 watts. Has a switch on it. But this is a Pros kit. It's an old one I've had for a long time. And it's a decent iron, but when you're working on cars, especially, you have to get down into some pretty tight spots sometimes to solder that wire to get it fixed. I can think of like an oil pressure sensor connector on a GM 39. You have to take the starter out and reach up in there, and you can barely get those wires and clip them and take your new connector and solder it in there, and that's a common problem on those. And, trying to get that big iron up in there it would be impossible. So, I've found that I use the Pinecil. The Pinecil is just completely awesome. It just works. It will put out plenty of heat. It will heat up big battery lug connectors, and it would do the most fine little surface mount. I did my Nintendo. I did the capacitor replacement with the little tiny surface mount caps. Work perfect, right? It's good for all kinds of stuff. You can adjust the heat. You can set the thermal runaway, so if something's taking too much heat, it'll shut down and say thermal runaway. I mean, you can do all this stuff. And it runs off a USB, so it's really neat. So I'm going to kind of go through my soldering supplies that I have and what I use. And I use this on car repairs or for anything that I need to solder these days. I always grab my Pinecil. So this is my little box I got at Harbor Freight that I keep a lot of my common wiring repair and troubleshooting stuff. I have a bunch of fuses in here. Some of these are, cheap Chinesium fuses. Some of them are real GM fuses. And I just go over to the junkyard where they're getting ready to crush a car, cut the fuse box out of it, take all the relays and fuses out. And saves you good money. They want a fortune for real fuses. See, I have some different relays and stuff in here. I have some different bulbs I keep in here. Just to be able to, troubleshoot with. These are all, again, just used ones from the junkyard. I have here, I have different types of lug connectors that I can crimp on. I have the hydraulic crimpers to crimp on a new lug connector. I have my little connectors. I even have those butt connectors with the built-in heat shrink. I'm not above using that if you just absolutely can't get to it to solder it, using one of those. If you have to make the repair, you have to. If it comes down to that, or ripping half the engine apart to get to the wiring harness, I'll use these. I don't even give the customer a choice, right? I don't want to rip a half an engine apart to get to a wiring harness and break 15 other things just to get to a wire. So I have those. I have some heat shrink in there. And then this one, again, has some more fuses. I have some of the big dogs. Some of these big giant fuses are in here. I have a couple connectors, but I have multiple. I go to the junkyard, and cars that are getting ready to scrap, I just go and start clipping off the ends, and I have big buckets of those, so that I can replace an end if I need to. There's some more relays, but mostly this is just all my heat shrink. It is not the self-sealing marine heat shrink. I don't use that. I'll show you why I don't use it. So that's the trays, and then up in the top here is mostly my soldering stuff. So I have this 65 watt battery pack. I've had it for a couple of years now. I've got some brake clean on it. It started to kind of wear the finish out on it a little bit, but it works. It works just fine. And that's what I power my soldering iron with. I keep some different 3M and, good electric tapes. I normally have my cloth tape in here, but I don't have it. I've got more over in the cabinet. I think I used the last of my roll, so I need to get that special tape back in here. Oh, I dropped mine. I have my little helping hands. These are magnetic, and these also come off, and you can use just one of them if you want to, right? But these will help hold those wires that are in those tough places where you just only could get one hand up in there and you can't hold the wire and the iron at the same time. I have some little super fine side cuts for working with little tiny stuff. Right? I have a cheap pair of little Harbor Freight side cuts that I keep in here. I have other side cuts, but those are handy. I have a little pair of needle nose. These are the Pros Kit needle nose. And my solders, so for a long time, this NTE was my favorite solder. Unfortunately, NTE I think they went out of business, or they at least quit making solder. So I couldn't get this for a long time. And so I went to this Chinesium solder that I found on Amazon. This is a 6040 lead tin. But it works. This solder works really good. It's just as good as this. And these used to be $4.25 a piece. And these were, I got like 10 of them for $5. So they're really good solders. Another one that I've been trying out that I like really well, and supposedly this is the NTE recipe, but it's now by Delta Solder. It's a 6040. And this works really well too. I really like it, and that's what the electronics store by me is selling now instead of the NTE. I also have some of this 6040 rosin. This is a little heavier duty, so if I'm soldering a big lug or something, I'll use that. I have some silver bearing. This is silver bearing solder, so it's 2% silver. I really like this Radio Shack solder. So Radio Shack went out of business, and I had some silver bearing solder here, and this is actually a thinner gauge. This is a .015. This is for really fine soldering connections. And I really liked having the silver bearing. There's some things that the silver bearing just works really good for. But then Radio Shack came back online with an online store for a while, so I bought a roll of this solder, which is silver bearing, but it's a .022, so it's a little bit thicker. And it looks slightly different, but now the online store is out of business again too. So that's all of that silver bearing solder that's Radio Shack that I'm going to get. I use the MJ Chemicals Super Wick. I get this at the electronics store. This is the heavier duty wick, and then this is the really fine wick. So you can just see they're different sizes, but that's for solder removal. So a lot of times if you get a part off and you need to clean out the solder hole or whatever for it, you use a little solder wick to clean that out. I really like solder wick. I do have a old Radio Shack solder sucker that I use sometimes, but really just getting that part out and then cleaning it up with solder wicks is usually good enough. I have my tip tenor, and so this is by Thermaltronics. It's thermaltronics.com. But you just dip your soldering iron in there and it retens the tip. So you can have a tip that's all messed up and you think, oh, I'm going to have to get a whole new tip. You dip it in there and it becomes like a new tip. This tip tenor has been a life changer. He's saved me so much money in buying new ends for my soldering irons. And then I have this, which you clean the soldering iron with. And so the soldering iron is this Pinecil, right? It's really light, really tiny. It works well. And then I also have a shorter tip for it. So if I really got to get up into a tight area, I'm not sure where. Oh, here's my shorter tip. So I have another one of these long tips. So I have a spare. And what had happened is I bought a new tip, but I kept the old one because this one just lost its ability to ten. And then I discovered the tip tenor, and I'm like, oh, I'll keep that because I can just use the tip tenor with it and I have another good tip. But then I have a shorter tip for it, for when I really need to get into a tight spot. I can run that shorter tip. And you can buy these tips on, Amazon or wherever. They all seem to work just fine. This is the Pinecil version 2. I used to have a Pinecil version 1, and then I plugged it into a laptop charger one day because I just thought, well, I don't have my battery with me. I'll just plug it in there. And that laptop charger put out 24 volts. And the version 1 soldering iron, it blows them if you plug them into a 24 volt USB. The version 2 is going to run on the 24 volt just fine. So I destroyed that one, and then I bought this one. But yeah, it's got the USB-C there on the end, and it has a coaxial jack too, which you can adapt that if you want to and plug it into a power source there, but I always use the USB-C. Let's see. Oh, I have a couple of these. You guys who like Nintendo will know what these are for. Old Nintendo. See, I have some MJ Chemicals No Clean Flux. This is what I use when I need some extra flux. It works really great. I have a little tiny soldering stand so I can set my soldering iron down. What I've been thinking of doing is buying a cheap soldering stand and then taking the end off of it and mounting it to a magnet so I can stick that magnet in a car or whatever and have a place to just put my soldering iron when I'm working on a car. I'm thinking about doing that. I just have to spend the money on Amazon, and I don't like to spend money. And so, what I was saying is I don't use that marine grade heat shrink. I just always use a little bit of clear nail polish, and then I paint over the connection with the clear nail polish, slide the heat shrink up and heat shrink it, and it makes a nice weather tight seal. I mean, you can use the marine grade and pay more for it or whatever. I just don't. I just use a little bit of the nail polish. These are getting kind of expensive though. This was like $4 or $5 at Dollar Tree. No, at Dollar General. So I gotta find some cheaper nail polish that's clear. And then this is the cord that I use to plug it in. So this is from Pinecil. They sell this all silicone cord that supposedly it won't burn, but it will burn a little bit if you get it hot enough. I lent, this didn't used to be burnt. I lent my soldering iron to somebody and it came back burnt. So just don't lend out your tools to people who don't know how to use them. And basically you plug that in the end of the iron, and then I just plug this into my battery right here, and it automatically turns on. Now I have this, and now you just have to hold down the plus key. Oh, hold it down. Or maybe you just tap it. No, it's not turning on. Hang on. Oh, yeah, you just tap it. You don't hold it down. And you can see it's heating up there. And it heats up pretty quick. And that's in Celsius, and this should be, I think 440 Celsius is where I normally keep it. Yeah, 440, 442, right? And you're ready to solder from that point on. You can go ahead and melt you a little bit of solder. And it's just that easy. And so if I want to clean my tip, I'll get my tip tinner out, and I'll get this out, and I'll just stab into that a couple times, and that cleans it off real good. I'll put this in my tip tinner and then hit this again, and you have a perfectly tinned tip. No matter how dirty or crusty your tip is, that tip tinner works miracles. And then you can solder again, you know. It's just that simple. Oh crap, oh, burnt my leg. Okay. But yeah, it just works. So, and then to turn it off, you can adjust the temperature by just hitting it. So I can turn the temperature down by hitting the minus key. And there's at 390, and it'll cool down and go to 390, and it's already at 390. Or you can hold down the minus key for a couple seconds and it'll turn off, and it'll just power down and it'll cool. The other thing I like about this iron is it doesn't lean forward when you sit it down. So if you do need to sit it on something, as long as you sit it on something flat, it's not going to heat it up or melt it. But I do have my little stand right here. I just have this little stand. And this had a sponge with it, but now that I have that tip tinner, I never use a sponge. But then you can just sit your iron down there like that, and you let it cool down, and then you unplug it and you're ready to go. And it'll be cool here in just a couple minutes. It's already down to 230. So it's really a good iron when you have to like solder something really fast and get in there, get it done, let it cool off, and then back up and go on to the next car, right? It's just the handiest thing in the world. I just can't believe that people still buy like big giant soldering stations, or those Milwaukee soldering irons are a joke. They're ceramic, so they always break. This is tough. I have dropped it, slammed it, thrown it around, and I haven't destroyed a tip yet. I just had this tip, I couldn't get to 10 anymore, so I bought that one, and then I saw that tip tinner, and I'm like, I'm gonna buy some of that. And that tip tinner works awesome, and it'll just last forever. And you can clean up an old tip. To change the tip, you just have to use a little tiny Phillips screwdriver right there in the end, and take that Phillips screw out, and then it pops out, and you can pop the other one in. That's all it takes. It's just a really good iron. I know it has more like different settings and stuff in here you can play around with and read a book on it. I just used it. I just set the temperature, turned it on, and use it. I've changed any of the settings in here or anything. And it will run on less battery power. So you can plug this into a 30 amp charger, and it will run. It'll just take longer to heat up and won't run as well. Even like a 15 watt charger, it'll power up, but it may not come up to full temperature or whatever. So it'll still work with less of a USB power source. But this USB-C one's great. It lasts for hours and hours and hours on this battery. I just use it and use it and use it. And then every once in a while, I'll plug it in and charge it. Plus, you know, this battery can power my laptop. It can charge that, charge my phone. So I can use this battery for everything. It still has all the, I don't know if you can see it there, but it has these lights that show how much power is left. It still has a full charge. I don't think they sell this particular one anymore, but it's been a good one. But Anchor or any of those will work. This was actually the cheapest one I could find. It was like $29 on eBay. These aren't terribly expensive. They're like 35 bucks or something for the soldering iron. The cable was like 10 bucks. I mean, it's really a good deal. Oh, we got some more just soldering wick here. I got a spare one. But yeah, I mean, that's all my soldering stuff that I use to just solder wires and do repairs. And it's really quick. A lot of people see this Pinecil and they think that's a little tiny soldering iron. It's just not going to work for automotive. I'm going to get the Milwaukee or the Ryobi or the this or the that. This works wonderful for automotive. It's a game changer when you have wiring repairs to do. It's just fast and easy. You don't have to run extension cords, get out a power source, hook up to an inverter. You just grab your battery pack, which you carry in the box with it, and plug it in and go. That's the main thing that I really love about it. And I don't know how Pinecil came about, but I think it's kind of like an open source thing. At least the software, I believe, on it's open source. And I think the soldering iron was kind of that way too. I mean, that's why they're not real expensive. But yeah, I really love this. So that's all I got for now, folks. I'll talk to y'all later. This is Tom, your Frugal Prepper.